everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Interpreting in Healthcare, brought to you by the National Council on Interpreting in Healthcare and sponsored by the Standards and Training Committee. Today we have an extra special guest. I'm so excited she could make time to be with us today. It's Enrica Ardemagni. Let me tell you a little bit about Enrica for those of you who have not been members for like more than 5 minutes, because everybody else knows who you are, Enrica. She holds a PhD in Spanish from the University of Wisconsin with a focus on medieval literature and historical linguistics, and an MA and BA in Spanish from the University of Arkansas. A professor emerita at Indiana University, Indianapolis, teaching all levels of language and literature, as well as Spanish for the professions and specific purposes, SPSP, business, legal, medical. She's developed over 15 courses in translation, translation studies, and interpreting, and served as director of the undergraduate and graduate certificates in translation studies and director of graduate studies. She's published and presented numerous scholarly articles and presentations, and she is a published literary translator. During her tenure at Indiana University, she received 16, count them, 16 teaching awards. Professor Ardemagni is one of the founding members and served 3 terms as president of the Midwest Association of Translators and Interpreters. She served 2 terms as, oops, 2 terms as the administrator of the ATA Literary Division. She was president of the National Council on Interpreting in Healthcare for 6 years and still serves on 2 NCIHC committees. After retirement, Enrica has had the opportunity to continue teaching graduate and undergraduate courses in translation, interpreting, and medical Spanish, and she writes curriculum in interpreting studies for universities. That sounds like a busy retirement, Enrica. She holds a certificate in online teaching. She is an Indiana and Arkansas Supreme Court certified interpreter and a certified healthcare interpreter, CHI Spanish. She's been named a lifetime member of the Midwest Association of Translators and Interpreters and the American Translator Association. So, welcome, Enrica. I'm so happy you could join us here today.
Thank you
And
very much.
you're in Italy right now, so
Yeah,
extra point.
I hope it doesn't drop, what can I say?
Yes, fingers crossed, and hope
Yes.
that I don't leave my screen share up like I just did before, but we'll just roll with it. Um, So, you have the viewpoint that many of us wish we had because you were there at the beginning, in the middle, and you're still in it. You're still doing the job. You're still training interpreters. You're still creating training curricula for interpreters and translators. I mean, if anyone's opinion is to be listened to, I think you have a lot of valuable experience, and also the perspective of just knowing where you can successfully push for change and where those points of resistance still are that we need to grind against. So, with that broad view in mind, as you look back, what excites you the most to remember? What are you most proud of in this journey?
Well, that is like a really uh, nice introduction, beyond nice, and also sums up how I feel because I feel like I am in all 3 areas, so to speak. So I consider myself an academic professor at the university. And I also am involved with several nonprofit organizations that have to do with both translation and interpreting. But I'm also in the trenches, so I'm still interpreting, not on a full time basis, but I try to split my time between court interpreting and medical interpreting because I think there needs to be a little bit of a balance there for my own self care, which is one of the things that I promote for interpreters. But I think that one of the things that I feel most proud about is that, and this is going to age me, but uh, in approximately 1985, when I was hired by Indiana University, they asked me to develop a course that they thought would be practical for Spanish majors.
Mhm.
And I was good friends with the official translator for the Spanish author Ana Maria Matute. And so he and I were good friends. He had done a lot of work in translation studies. And as a result, he and I started doing some research together. Plus, we did some presentations together. So I decided to offer a course in translation. And it took a long time for me to develop the course. It was already on the books, but people had not been teaching the course for a while. So I felt like I needed to bring it up to date with where the world was in translation at that time. So I think that was one um, step forward for our department and being able to offer a course. And then it became like a domino effect because from there, I went into offering courses in interpreting because I had worked as an interpreter, and it just the two matched together to the extent that we eventually developed a certificate in translation studies and interpreting. But I think the part that I felt most happy about, or where I felt like I had accomplished the most, was in academia. We have a program called service learning. So the students that are in your courses, you can take a component of that class, like say if I was teaching medical interpreting, I would have my students set aside 20 hours worth of the equivalent of class time to do observations, to follow interpreters, etc. I was able to do that in by establishing lots of partners in the community. So I had my connections through the hospitals because I also had to worry about HIPAA with the hospitals, right? And then I had my connections in the court, and so and there the courts are open, so they can just go in and sit and listen to people interpreting, right? And also in community. So we were doing translations for organizations such as the fire department. And
Mhm.
I remember once the fire department invited me and the students and me, good English, to come to what was it was a program that they had about teaching people how to avoid having a fire in the house.
Right.
And prior to that, they sent a one-page document that they asked our students to translate. And it was like, number one, don't put candles under curtains. Number two, this how do you escape from a building, get out of the whatever it was. And so so the students first of all translated the document, and then when they invited us to actually go through the training, what they did was they rented or they got the buses from the local public schools to bus in people who spoke Spanish to go through the training. And my students were the interpreters if they didn't understand
Oh, that's
anything.
great.
And the the students, and I would say this for almost all of my classes, is that at the end of the year, professors, we get the old wacko, they're going to do the evaluations. That class really sucked, or that class was okay. Invariably, every course that I taught as a service learning class where my students were either translating and they knew people were reading the translations and that it was for a purpose, or that they were interpreting or that they could follow interpreters and they understood the internal system, because that's one of the problems that I think we're still lacking in a lot of our training, is that their evaluations were, we thought that this was the best part of this class was going to the fire department or going to the courts or whatever it was. So I got high marks on connections with the community. And I think that those students, because that that goes back to, I started doing that maybe in around 1990, and I still am in touch with the students that have been in those programs. So I think
Oh, that's a great
that's
story.
a connection, yeah, because they might be working in education, they might be working as translators. I've had several, I've lost track of how many have told me that they're now CHIs through CCHI, which is, like this is sort of the epitome for me. Like, it's not just the classroom. It's, like, where are you going to take this after you're going to, because I'm very, as an academic, I believe in theory and practice. They need to know the theory. They need to be able to use the meta language that is necessary to understand what is happening in interpreting or translation, but they also need to take that leap forward and practice it if they want to. So sorry for the long answer.
That's a great answer. Not only because when it's a kinesthetic experience, you tend to remember it with such with greater clarity than you would if you just read about it or talked about it because it
Right,
involved all your senses.
right.
And the opportunity to connect with the community. How does the community know that you care about the fact that they don't understand how to penetrate past that phone tree that they get, even if you have staff interpreters? Uh,
Hmm.
the interface often to get to the point where you connect with interpreter services so that you can get your
Yeah,
information
yeah.
is
And
still a challenge.
and that community connection, I think, is very important because they get to know you. And it got to the point where me out there searching, scrounging around, where can I get somebody to place my students, is that my phone was ringing off the wall. It's not on the wall anymore. My phone was ringing. Do you have any students that you can send this semester? You have it. The other point I'd like to point out is that when you're in the classroom, which is what we can many times call an artificial or a simulated uh, um, environment. So you can practice the interpreting in the classroom. But when you're in the classroom, it might be student A who's playing the student interpreting, student B who's reading the English, student C who's reading the Spanish, and I'm rotating, listening to them, or we're recording. In most cases, we're recording. Um, that's one situation. But when you go actually into where you're seeing an interpreter in action, I think that is extremely important. And I'll give you an example. And I teach Spanish for law enforcement, and part of that is court interpreting. And what they would do is the interpreters would actually schedule me, the person that was in charge of the supervision at the courts, would schedule me to go in because they felt that the students would feel more comfortable watching me interpret than watching another interpreter. And I said, well, but they've got to watch other interpreters. But one day I was just happened to be in court, and it was a plea, and I was doing simultaneous interpreting. Now, in medical, we do mostly consecutive, but in court, you're going to do a lot of consecutive. And I was standing at the bench with the judge, and they were reading the plea, and it's about I'm interpreting like this, and they could see that I was looking down on a piece of paper. I had 3 students who were shadowing me that day, and when I walked out, one of the students said, wow, you were lucky they gave you a piece of paper to read from. And I went, and I said, well, because I didn't know what she was referring to. And I said, what piece of paper? And she said, well, I know they knew it was a plea because they knew what a plea agreement was. And they said, we heard you interpreting the plea and you were talking so fast. We thought you were reading from the paper. And I said, well, the paper was in English. And so they were going, so you were like sitting there looking at the English and interpreting at the same time in Spanish. How could you possibly do that? And I said, it takes a lot of practice, you know, but that's where you realize, how much of that are they not getting in the classroom? Are they getting
Right.
really, yeah, what is the difference between sight translation? What is consecutive? What is simultaneous? And they get all of that if they get to observe and shadow other interpreters, yeah,
Even with a practice dialogue, whether it's text that they're reading from or a recording that they're listening to, if they get most of it but want to replay that last part or reread that last part, it's there. But in
yeah,
real life, when you ask someone what they just said, what do they say? I don't remember.
yeah. And we talk about note taking. They see that I'm note taking, taking notes in the court, in simul. I'm only writing down names, phone numbers, or whatever it is, and they're going, how can you do that? Because it's just sort of like it all comes in on them. Like this, it's going here, it's coming out here. She's yakking away and she's writing at the same time. Yeah,
There's
yeah.
a lot
So
of
it's a big
cognitive
difference.
skills being juggled at the same time.
And that's the important thing is, what cognitive fields are we dealing with? And so this is why the theory is important, that they learn that so that they can understand what is happening when we are doing that.
Well, that kind of ties in nicely with the fact that my next question has to do with the present. And at present, I am seeing some interesting research being done on cognitive capabilities and interpreter fatigue with Andrea Henry and her
Hmm.
statistician over at is she at is it she at a children's
In it,
hospital in Atlanta,
yeah,
I believe.
yeah, yeah,
And I would like to see more data driven information so it helps us assess how long is too long and when should breaks be given and how do
right.
supervisors assess who's a good interpreter. It just can't be number of minutes on a call. That's not
No,
we need something that assesses the degree of difficulty of that exchange. But there's a lot more that is beginning to emerge in that area. So right now, what's happening that either you see as a big challenge or as an exciting new development that you'd like to talk?
well, as you say, more research, obviously, and I've been uh, involved in this artificial intelligence stuff, and so I've been doing some of that, and it's like throwing us wonkers, so to speak, with all the research that is going on, because that's now another thing that has been thrown into the basket. It's like we can't just limit ourselves to the research of the cognitive areas that we've been working on before. We have to bring in all the technology that is now impacting us, because if we as both translators and interpreters don't keep up with it, we're going to not be able to keep up with what is going on. But this is where, like you say, more research. There are some researchers that are doing some really great stuff, and I think it's just that part is lagging behind a little bit. But I think like Andrea Henry, who's done quite a bit. There's a professor at University of North Carolina at Charlotte, Chris Mellinger, who you've probably heard of. He's done quite a bit in that area. And then also Laura Gascon has also done, Josh Prada. So there's research that's going on. But it's catching up. And the other thing is that when I interpret only Spanish and English. And there's the studies that are happening with his, you know, which shall I say, that are, what is happening in the bilingual brain.
Mhm.
So, because it's different. A lot of people are wondering, is the bilingual brain functioning the same way when they're interpreting as other people? So now it's really too much to get into, but I can say that I, will read an article a day to try to keep up with what's going on with stuff. It's really hard to do, but it's very intriguing, and I think that we're going to have a lot coming out. But of course, there's always room for more research.
And we have to be present in these discussions so that we are not language access is not an afterthought to a process.
Exactly,
It's
exactly.
baked into the process. So I encourage anyone who fears the ever growing presence of AI to just look at it the same way that we used to look, or to disregard the fear that we had when we were poised to start using machine translation versus, a term base versus
Hmm.
starting to go from telephone to video. Oh, is this going to replace the interpreter? No, but the interpreter that knows how to use these things is going to be more employable than the
Right,
interpreter who doesn't. So
right,
I think if we
right.
take that attitude in, then we really need to sort of bang on the table and say, hey, where's
Yeah.
my spot because I need to be
Yeah.
included in the conversation from the start.
And I think you brought up a very important point. Um, Going back to machine translation, I remember when I first started teaching translation, I developed a course and I called it Computers and Translation because I wanted my students to be tech savvy. And
Right.
I was able to get a license for Trados at my university and one for WordFast because they have an academic version that they'll let us use. The students were like, "Oh my gosh, we have to take this course in technology and computers as part of the certificate program." And they actually said, "Can you waive that course?" And I said, "The
Nope.
only thing I would waive is you out of this program if you don't take this course."
Oh,
And so they'd start working with Trados or they'd start working with WordFast, and by the end of the semester, like it's like, where how do we purchase this? Can we get a student discount? And I know I have one student who at the end of the semester was, using it. She had a somebody that she started her own company and she was using Trados a lot. And one day I was like, I have a driver's license. Can you do it? And she goes, Yeah, I'm going to stick it in Trados. And I said, It's just a driver's license. And she's like, But now I'm so into, right, that it's really
grow
hard
that
to.
term base.
Exactly. Yeah.
Oh, that's funny. So this kind of goes right to my next question, which is looking forward. Uh, because of the reliance on technology, there are things that I think I used to be better at that I am no longer any good at. Like I don't know anyone's phone number anymore.
Me
I can
neither.
still remember the phone number of my first apartment where I lived on my own independently in New York City. I can't remember my son's new number since I still remember the area code that he's in, but he has a new number. So the one I memorized, right? My phone
Yeah.
has it all, right? And the driving apps, and now the 3 point, the K turn or the parallel parking apps on the car. It's like that was an interesting comment you made. It's just a driver's license. You can actually do that on your own. Oh, but now I'm really reliant on my translation software.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
like, are we going to lose anything from, or maybe if we're just mindful to keep up the practice that we need to keep our cognitive skills sharp, and
Right.
we'll be in good shape. But it is something that concerns me about the smarter the technology gets. Will we still keep up our own smartness, or will we begin to be too reliant on other things? Like nobody
It's
knows how to
very
change a tire nowadays.
well. It's very interesting you bring that up because just looking over the spread of many years of teaching, I remember way back when I first started teaching, I had to take a course in pedagogy, and you probably had to take one also, your master's program. But I know that back then they would teach us how to do a lesson plan for class, and they would say, okay, you want to start always with a warm up that something that they know from before so that they feel comfortable jumping into the new material. Don't walk into the classroom and just give them something new. So warm them up and then hit them with the new stuff. And then change every 10 to 15 minutes because the attention span is not longer than that. You can continue with the same content, but present it in a different way. So if you're teaching vocabulary, you might have them read a story, or you might have them fill in the blanks in a conversation, or you might have them read a conversation or something. But they said after 20 minutes, you also need to change the content. Okay. And so I don't remember where I read this, but I also saw it in my classroom, is that I was not able to, when I retired out of teaching at the university, I was not able to maintain that 20 minutes of teaching in the same content area. I had to shuttle it back to maybe 10 minutes and then shift it because the attention span was gone. So yeah, if we don't continue to use, the cognitive ability that we have, we are going to use it. I'm like you. I know I have two phone numbers and I don't even know my second phone number. I have a Google Voice number that I use for business, and I just dial me on my cell phone. So that's pretty puny in my opinion. But it's a very good point, and I think it's probably one of the challenges that we that are still working and training really need to focus on with our students.
Yes, yes, I do a lot of work with different types of memory exercises with students and intersperse that with practice dialogues on the days that we're
That's
looking at
great.
it and
Yeah.
less conceptual, because I too have noticed it's like let's alternate sentences between four people because the ability to sustain the concentration, I've got to start with small bits and stretch. I
Right.
can't expect people to
Right.
listen to even 45 minutes of a lecture that's I've
Yeah.
lost two-thirds of them 15 minutes in.
Yeah. Yeah. I do memory techniques and things also in my classes, but I'm always open to listening to others and see what kind of memory practices
I
they're
need
doing
more
because
arrows in my quiver
well, this is it.
because
I
I'm
think that we,
recycling them much more
as
quickly now.
trainers, we
Yes,
learn as much from one another. And, I think we learn from our students. I've always said that I feel like I learn as much from my students as they're learning from me. But I think that, I attend as many webinars as I can, things that are being offered through NCIHC, a lot of stuff coming through ATA now that's very good. And, um, uh, all of it is just you can't go wrong if you I did I think it was Joy Connell and I did a presentation at ATA called lifelong learning, and it was probably bare bones, like what do you do but this is the kind of job where you do have that lifelong learning. You can't ever stop. Yeah.
and I think in order to be successful, that's what you have to be. Not
Yeah.
just bilingual, not just compassionate, but a lifelong learner, a curious person
Right.
who's willing to invest time to keep growing. And
Yeah.
then you will be able to, look very calm and serene on top. And like a duck, your little legs will be paddling furiously under the water to get all the assignments that you need to,
Yeah.
meet
Well,
your
also
financial
if you're
demands.
or if you get into something where you're interpreting and you have the unexpected, like just right before this, I was interpreting in court, and they give us usually the name of the person that we're interpreting and what kind of case it is. We don't know details, but I had that, and when I log on, and then they said, and our five cases are, and I was like, whoa, whoa, five cases. I was expecting one, and that was why I was like, okay, I hope this is done with within an acceptable time period here, because I have something else to do, but we can't just stop that, so we have to be
Right.
prepared. All of the logistics, it's everything that's thrown at you, like you say, you're gonna have to backpedal a lot. The other day I had a judge in court who was saying, "Do you think we could put the skids on that case a little bit until whatever it was?" And I was like, as a native English speaker, I understood what she's saying. How many other people understood it? Because it sounded like sort of maybe a regional expression, and uh, I didn't have to interpret it, luckily. But I was just it. There were about 10 people. It was a child juvenile case, and so there were about 10 people on the call. And then when it was over, she said, "Well, Madam Interpreter, you can hang up now." And I said, "Okay, thanks for putting the skids on this." And she's like, "Ha ha, you picked up on that." And I said, "Yeah, and I'm glad I didn't have to interpret your little slang terminology."
Oh my goodness. Yeah, and I have certain dialogues that are full just of little idioms and colloquialisms like that to
Yeah.
prove to students, look, it's not just the very high register medical terminology.
Mm-mm.
Things, simple terms like he was acting out or let's get to the bottom of this. If
Yeah.
you've heard it, it's like the bottom of what? Isn't there a noun missing?
Or if you get in Spanish the word for foot, sometimes they'll say pie, or sometimes they'll use pierna, leg. So if they, because it's the whole thing, and if they say pierna, I stop and say interpreter wants to clarify if they're referring to the leg or to the foot, because I knew that the patient was there for the a foot problem. And the healthcare provider is looking at me like, she's sort of a certified interpreter. Should she not know the difference between leg and foot at this point? But they don't understand the intricacies of how languages themselves are used by different people,
Yep.
right? So,
Yep.
so when I talk about that in class, also don't be
And
surprised
and
if you get in there and
and
they call the
these
foot the
expressions,
leg.
they don't always make sense. My
Mm.
my aunt always says, English is the only language where you can chop a tree down and then chop it up.
Well, and as a good Southerner, I remember an old English professor that I had. He said, "Where else in the United States can you have so many prepositions? We now call them phrasal verbs, right?" But he said, "A cat, like you have a cat, right? The cat ran under the sofa or the bed, and you get mad and you say, 'Get out from up and under there.'
Up
Get
and
out
under that.
from
That's
up
right.
in under there." You've got five prepositions going on there. And to me, it makes perfect sense.
Yep.
Yeah,
Well, that's our job, right? To help it make
it's our
perfect
job.
sense.
Yeah. But you got to admit, it's fun.
It is
Probably what
fun.
keeps us in the profession.
And it's been fun talking to you today, Enrica. Thank
Thank
you
you
so
very
much for
much.
joining us. And stay tuned, everybody, for another episode coming up shortly.